Thank you for joining me for this Lifeway study of the books of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. This is session 12. The title is Faithful, and our text is Ruth chapter 1, verse 11 through 18, and chapter 2, verses 5 to 12. The lesson summary statement I have altered a bit. I've tried to keep the spirit of it and the idea of it, but I've changed it in a way that I think communicates a more present day principle or truth. The way I'm stating it is this way: even in our darkest moments, God is quietly working for our good. Now, in light of that, I want to make a couple of announcements before we look into the lesson. On August the 30th will be my last Sunday as the pastor of Northeast Baptist Church. God has wonderfully blessed me with the privilege of being their pastor for 36 years. And I began these video studies as a way to supplement the study of Sunday school teachers at our church. And thankfully, God brought you along with us. And so thank you for your faithfulness and your participation in these studies. As a result of my retirement, I do hope to continue doing the video studies, but I am going to take a bit of a sabbatical for this next quarter. The next quarter is Romans, and I want to recommend a book to you in terms of your study. It's Romans by John R.W. Stott. This is an excellent book. It's well written, it's easy to understand, it's practical, it divides the book up beautifully and understandably. I think it would be money well spent if you don't have that commentary. It's in a series called The Bible Speaks Today. It's an InterVarsity Press publication. But I would encourage you to get that. From times past, there are 4 videos that I have in this Sunday school series that are exact identical passages in these studies on Romans. And we're going to try and post those during those weeks, so they might be of benefit to you, at least in terms of the explanation of the text. There are 3 or 4 other lessons that have portions of the passage, and we'll post those. Hopefully they might be of benefit to you as well. And God willing, then at the end of the next, at the beginning of the next quarter, I will join you again in terms of these Bible studies. But I just want to take some time for my wife and I to concentrate on some things we want to do from now to the end of the year. The second thing I want to do is I want to thank Michael Williams. Michael is the media technology minister at our church, and he has just been a godsend when it comes to these videos. He's made them so much more understandable and easy for you in terms of use, and I just am very blessed and grateful for him. I'm going to have my grandson, Graham, help me in the future, and I'm looking forward so much to him and I getting to interact with the scriptures and producing these videos for the benefit of the teachers. But I'm grateful for you. Thank you for being a part of this, and I would appreciate your prayers for this church as it searches for God's man to become the pastor. I love this church. It's a wonderful church, and I'm so very desirous of them finding the man that God's prepared for this church. So would you please join me in that? Now, to begin the study for this Sunday, I'm going to have on the board the word hero, and then I'm going to write this statement, this question under it. What words do you associate with a hero? And from that, I'll lead that into an ABC news article that I found on YouTube about recently a teenage lifeguard who rescued a 10-year-old boy in the surf. He was being dragged out to sea, and it's really quite heroic what this young man did to rescue this 10-year-old and bring him to safety. It was such a noticeable thing that the President of the United States noticed it, had him come to the White House, and gave him an award. And so I want to show that as a picture to demonstrate the idea of a hero. One of the most unlikely heroes in the Bible is a young Midianite woman by the name of Ruth. So beginning in chapter 1, verse 1, those first 10 verses, I want to summarize those as background to what we're going to talk about in our Sunday school text. These horrible tragedies of Naomi have just almost overwhelmed her. So the first thing that we see, the first point, is loss. Ruth chapter 1, verse 11 to 15. And I just simply want to walk through the text, giving some explanation about it. It says in verse 11, "But Naomi replied, 'Return home, my daughters.'" This is the second time that she has implored her daughters or daughter-in-laws to return home. And the fact that she calls them daughters tells you something of the relationship they had. Naomi must have been just a marvelous person. Her name means pleasant, and until this time, she must have been a pleasant person and had such an attractive personality. These young women love her deeply. They love her more than their own families. And then it says, "Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands?" The answer is obviously no. Return home. That's the third time that she has said that to her daughter-in-laws. Go, that is also emphatic. That is a command. And so is the word return home. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. There's another argument. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? She's just layering these arguments. Would you restrain yourself from remarrying? Well, no, my daughters. Your life is much too bitter for you to, my life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Now, what Naomi does, she layers these arguments one on top of another to convince them you should return home to your family and to your culture. That's where your future is. That's where your promise is. And I can't possibly provide you other sons. And on top of all of that, why would you want to be with me when the Lord's hand is against me? No, my daughters, my life is much too bitter for you to share. Verse 14, again they wept loudly. The word means they were overcome with emotion. Think about it. Here's 3 widows, 2 young women who've lost their husbands, another woman who's lost her husband, and both of her sons. She is as bereft of family and support and security as an Israelite woman could possibly be. And you and I could only imagine how deeply they must have sobbed and cried. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she convinces Orpah. Orpah's decision was understandable and practical. There's no reflection that she's done anything wrong. In fact, everything about Orpah's decision is sensible under the circumstances, because her decision promised a future, promised security. Orpah is going back to be a wife, but Ruth's decision is going to be a decision that she may very well remain a daughter. And the last thing that Naomi says, she says to Ruth, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Follow your sister-in-law." This was her final argument, that you should go back because Orpah has made this decision. Now imagine the pressure that Ruth is under in this decision. She's going to give up her heritage. She's going to give up her pagan faith. She's going to give up her culture, her family, the prospect of marriage and children. She knows that it's going to be difficult when she gets back to Israel, being a Moabite, because there's this tension that exists between these 2 groups of people. But Naomi really understands that her going back as the widow of an Israelite man makes it even more difficult for the possibilities of her ever marrying and having children and having a future. She knew that more than likely that her life was going to be like Naomi's life, that is, almost homeless, broke, and alone. And she simply doesn't want that for this woman. Well, there's much more that can be said about this. For example, Naomi's arguments is, I'm too old for a husband. Secondly, I'm too old to have sons. Thirdly, would you wait if that were the case, even if that were possible? That doesn't make sense either. And number four, I'm being judged by God. She sees her life as impoverished and lonely, and she simply doesn't want Ruth to be a part of that. But Ruth simply will not listen. So how do we take this idea of loss? Because that's what the Sunday school lesson is talking about. It's emphasizing that these verses are talking about loss. And when you look at the life application statement, it says believers will suffer loss. So here's some suggestions of what I'm going to do. I'm going to break this into 4 different groups, and I'm going to give them these kinds of instructions. For example, group number 1, I want them to deal with this subject. Loss is part of living in a fallen world. Loss is part of living in a fallen world. I think that's pretty obvious from this text. And here's what I want them to deal with. I'll put this on a card. I'll give it to a table of people, and I'll say, this is what I want you to discuss. Since Christians still experience the brokenness of life, what kinds of losses do believers commonly face? What kind of losses do believers commonly face? As a follow-up question, does recognizing that suffering is normal, not unusual, does that help us respond with faith instead of surprise or discouragement? So let me read those again. Since Christians still experience the brokenness of life, what kinds of losses do believers commonly face? They're going to find we face all kinds of losses. We find every loss that others people face. But how does recognizing that suffering is normal, not unusual, help us to respond with faith instead of surprise and discouragement? The second group, here's the statement I want them to deal with. And I'll give them 5 to 8 minutes, something like that, to have a discussion on this. The second one is this: loss exposes what we cannot control. Loss exposes what we cannot control. When you look at this, these things were out of Naomi's hands. The loss of her husband, the loss of her sons, the famine that drove them out of Israel into Moab. So here's some questions to think about that. Loss exposes what we cannot control. Think of a time when loss reminded you that you weren't in control. How did that experience change the way you viewed God's sovereignty? Why is surrender often harder than the suffering itself? So the second point, loss exposes what we cannot control, and the questions of them dealing with in terms of that subject. Again, what I'm trying to drive home is this issue of loss. We all experience loss, but we're believers. We're followers of a sovereign God. So that's got to have a different kind of response on our part. A third group. This is the truth. Loss reveals where our hope truly rests. You're going to see that Naomi really struggled with her faith. Loss reveals where our hope truly rests. Here's a couple of questions I'd like from that group to deal with. Why do some people run toward God in loss while others pull away? Isn't that an interesting response? And what expectations about God get challenged during suffering? Job is a good example of that. How can we gently help someone whose hope has been shaken? So I want them to deal with that. And the fourth group is, here's the truth I want them to deal with that I think comes out of this text. Loss reminds us that faith is a lifeline, not a shield. Faith is a lifeline, not a shield. Here are questions. Why is it dangerous to believe that Christians should be protected from suffering? And how does Jesus' promise that we will have trouble actually strengthen our faith? When truth help us hold on to God, what truths help us hold on to God when life hurts? So I'm wanting to give these 4 assignments to groups. Maybe I'll give it to, depending on the size of the class, it may be 1 person or 2 people get one of them. I want them to take a moment to discuss that, and then we'll have a time of reporting back to the class. But I'm trying to take this idea, even in our darkest moments, God is quietly working for our good. That's important to remember when we're experiencing loss, because we will experience loss. The second point is loyalty. Loyalty. Again, this is a wonderful, beautiful text. And let me give you some things about how it is broken down. There are 6 short promises that express the very soul of a lifelong commitment. Now, the first 2 promises, it talks about a need for social closeness. You'll notice, where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. So this commitment, this lifelong commitment, has about it a need for social closeness. The third promise, shared relations with others, and especially others of a family member. Listen to what Ruth says when it comes to her commitment. She says to your people will be my people. This is a wonderful thing to talk to young couples about, that when they marry, it's not just the person they're marrying they get all of the other people standing behind them. Your people will be my people. This kind of commitment is a shared relations with others. The fourth promise is a deeply shared faith commitment. She says, your God will be my God. Many commentators believe that is an expression where Ruth says she's abandoned her Moabite pagan god Chemosh, and she has made a commitment to Israel's God, Yahweh. It is a faith commitment. The fifth and sixth promise talks about the length of the commitment. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The relationship would come to an end by only one means, and that is by death. And then it concludes with this solemn oath. Ruth was promising that nothing would cause her to forsake Naomi except death. It is a powerful, powerful picture. So here's what I want to talk to them about. You'll notice that the lesson application says we need to allow others to minister to us. So the point talks about loyalty. So somehow loyalty and ministry is needing to be united in this study of this point. And so my first question is, what are the characteristics of Ruth's loyalty? And I just want to list those on the board. And then I want to follow up, where do you see this kind of loyalty celebrated? And I hope they'll give me some answers on that. Where do they see that kind of loyalty celebrated today? Now, Naomi refused the help. Why did she do that? She obviously needed the help. But why did she do that? And we can talk about pride and shame and fear and self-reliance and all kinds of things as to why she refused to do that. And now I want to draw it closer to the class. How can we be a class where it's safe to receive ministry from one another without embarrassment? So what's involved in that? There are going to come up times in the future when our class members are going to have a need, a ministry. And it's an opportunity to express our love and our loyalty to them. So what do we need to do? What do we need to keep in mind where we make it acceptable for them to receive our ministry? And there'll be all kinds of things that need to be said there. A confidentiality is one of those. Another might be, we deal with this quietly. We don't broadcast it, except if there's something that can be said to our class. We're honest with them in terms of, we can do this, we really can't do that. Or maybe we keep the ministry as small as it's needed. Maybe there's just a couple of us in the class that need to do something, and the rest of the class doesn't need to know. I'm just asking the class, how can we be a class where it's safe to receive ministry without embarrassment? And then I want to ask them, who has shown Ruth-like loyalty in your life? When my wife and I had our son, and the news came that he had passed, When I came to my wife's hospital room, there were people there who were loving on her and caring for her. And then I had to leave and go deal with arrangements for Daniel. And then I would come back, and then I would have to leave, and back and forth as I carried out responsibilities that needed to be done. One of the things that happened is the room would change with people. There would be people there. The first time, they wouldn't be there the second time, with the exception of one person. His name was Cliff. He was a pastor in town. He and I were friends. And when I got there, Cliff was sitting in a chair. He was quiet. He didn't say anything. And when I left and I came back later, I don't know, maybe an hour or two later, Cliff was still sitting in that chair. The room had changed in many ways, but my friend Cliff had not left. I've never forgotten that. And the peace that it gave me, that my friend was there, and whatever my wife needed, he was there to help her. So I'm asking the class, what like that? What has happened to you like that? The third point is provision. Again, you can go through the verse and make explanation. There's wonderful things in this passage, and it's amazing. Your study will reveal how amazing Boaz's generosity is to this woman. He goes well beyond the bounds of what is normal behavior in terms of providing for her. He shows her amazing grace, grace undeserved. He is a picture of our Lord Jesus Christ, and she is very grateful for it. But what I want to do with my class, in light of what's happening in our church, is I want to do a case study with them that talks about provision. Again, even in our darkest moment, God is quietly working for our good. And to drive that home, I want to take a personal issue that's happening, and that is me leaving. So here's the case study. You could use it, or you could maybe adapt it to some event that's happening in your church. Northeast Baptist Church has just said goodbye to its pastor of 36 years. The sanctuary felt different. The pulpit looked strangely empty. People walked in with heavy hearts, some grieving, some anxious, some unsure what the future would hold. But for many, it was a spiritual earthquake. Now, this was the man who baptized their children, who buried their loved ones, who married their family, who prayed over their crisis, who preached thousands of sermons. He was suddenly gone. And the members are asking, what will happen to us now? The first Sunday after the pastor's retirement was the hardest. It was the attendance was low due to the Labor Day holiday. The mood was a little subdued. There were some tears shed during the singing. Others felt a strange sense of disorientation, like a ship without its captain. One longtime member said to her Sunday school class, "I know God's sovereign, but I feel like we've lost our anchor." Another member said, "I trust God, but I don't see what he's doing. It feels like we're walking into a fog." The congregation was hurting, and there was some fear about the future. But then their visiting preacher delivered the message. He stood up and he preached a message on God's faithfulness in transitions. He had no idea what all the church was feeling, yet his sermon seemed to address their fears. After the service, several church members said, and I want the class to conclude that. What is it that some of the members said after this sermon from this preacher, that God is faithful in transition? A deacon offered a prayer at the end of the service. He was normally a quiet, reserved man, but he prayed with an unusual boldness and tenderness. And his words steadied the room. People later said, and again, I want them to respond and fill in, how that prayer spoke to them about God's faithfulness in transitions. A youth was overheard talking in the hallway with his mother, and he said, "It feels weird without Pastor Ed, but," and then what did the youth say? A first-time visitor walked in on Sundays. He'd never met the former pastor, but after the service, she said, I don't know what's happening here, but what would she say if she would say, even in the darkest moments, God is faithful in the time of transition? By the end of the morning, many members realized something profound. The church had worshiped, the word had been preached, the Spirit had moved. God had not left them. The grief was real, but again, I want them to finish that statement. And then to draw the study to a close. Over the next weeks, the congregation began to see God's hidden provision more clearly. The deacons stepped up and provided the unity and the gentleness that the church needed. The staff led with wisdom and calmness. The Sunday school teachers taught with a renewed passion and a renewed love for their class to keep them close and together. The members encouraged one another more intentionally. A sense of shared responsibility emerged. God was knitting the church together. One member said later, I thought losing our pastor would break us, but God used it to show us. How would you complete that statement? Now to close the case study. The congregation discovered that God had been quietly working long before they saw the evidence. Transitions can feel dark, but God is already arranging the next step. The church's future is not anchored on one man. It's anchored in God's faithfulness. Even in the midst of a dark moment, God is quietly working for our good. God bless you. See you soon.